This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or Greek tragedy.
I'm not trolling.
And I love it.
I'm just pointing out where they're wrong.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
My daughter's music teacher was showing them some old Hulk Hogan videos on YouTube for some reason, and they thought it was hilarious. But they didn't understand, he's a wrestler, what wrestling was or any of that. So I was trying to explain to him, what Hulk Hogan was to us. And I was like, oh, well, he was like our version of Taylor Swift.
No.
Yeah, kind of.
No.
Like, if you think about it, the way my daughters talk about and love Taylor Swift is like what Hulk Hogan was to a lot of little kids.
Boys.
I'll back that up.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah, mostly boys.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, there really is,
See, you're a little young.
can you say Jason Momoa?
No, little boys don't care about Jason.
No, I'm not talking about little boys. I'm talking about the girls.
No.
Teenage girls?
No, but that's a different thing. Okay, Hulk Hogan was like in kids' movies. He was everywhere.
That's true.
And Hulkamania was running wild.
Yep. Then the Hulkster. Don't forget the Hulkster.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Like
He was
the
running
Stretch
wild.
Armstrong.
And ripping his shirt. The kids thought that was funny. But it was a quick cheat code for them to think about because they are obsessed with Taylor Swift.
So who is today's Macho Man Randy Savage? Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway.
It's a funny aside. Throw that in the comments. Matt's tuned out already.
Yeah, sorry, Matt. You look like you're sleeping.
No, I'm
writing.
making notes for our addendum discussion right now.
Yeah, he's thinking of Randy Savage. He's writing that down. All right, thanks, everybody. I don't even know if this is going to make it into the episode.
That probably shouldn't.
Okay. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. This is Talking Hardcore Trivia History. Talking Hardcore History Trivia Addendum episode. We just literally played the episode, the trivia that you probably listened to last week. It is the Death Throes of the Republic Part 1 trivia, where Scott...
I was on the board. All matters.
Scott almost came from behind.
I almost won.
He almost came from behind and got close. Almost made it a game.
Almost.
That's how we're going to say it. You almost made it a game.
It was neck and neck.
For the first two questions, it was a dead heat. Yep. And then now we're going to talk about we're going to do our typical thing where we talk about the episode. So, Death Throes of the Republic Part 1. And if you didn't listen to his trivia episode, go check it out. Okay. It is the start of Dan's telling of the fall of the Roman Republic, which is my freaking favorite series, maybe or tied with Wrath of Khans. Both awesome. But right now, I think Death Throes is the most pertinent one you could listen to, just because of the point in our history that we're at. The Mongol Empire one is still relevant, but not quite as much relevant to us right now. Anyway, Matt is joining us via Zoom or via, computer, and Scott here with me in the basement.
Yep, there you go. See, it actually happened.
Well,
I'm not a hologram.
For all you know, I'm deep faking all of this.
I'm real.
You don't even know what we look like. Matt's convinced that this is us, but we're all AI.
Wait till you actually meet us, Matt. We don't look like that.
No, basically, what we did is we made ourselves look uglier so that people wouldn't be intimidated. We used AI to ugly us up a bit because we're so handsome.
It's a filter.
People would be like, we can't even listen to what they're saying. I'm too busy staring at them. So, for the good of the world, we AI'd ourselves ugly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Speak for yourself.
We all appreciate your sacrifice.
Thank you, Matt. I thanks for playing along with the bit. All right.
So,
what jumped out to you during this episode, Scott?
Basically basically how politicians started using the masses and promising more and more of whatever, money, taxes, less taxes, corn, to garner votes basically, and to garner favor. And that really stuck out to me, and that's something that, the reason why the U.S. is not a democracy.
But Rome wasn't either.
No,
they weren't. That's important to remember. The only power those plebs had was their tribunes.
Yeah,
which is significantly less power than people have here now. The tribunes were elected by the people, and that was their only voice in the system.
Yep.
And they still had significantly less power than the senators
until Tiberius, right?
Even then, even after that.
But when people are coming out of the woodwork to make sure you get your vote, or to make sure that their voice is heard, that you're elected,
right?
That's a completely different story,
right?
I mean, I believe these people couldn't even find rooms to stay in.
Yeah, that was one thing Dan mentioned in the podcast. When it was a vote, one of the people who was running as a populare, basically.
Was that Tiberius? Or was
it was Tiberius.
Yeah.
There were so many people came to Rome and to vote, that the city was full.
Yep.
But even then, the type of power he had was decent, right? He could get things done.
It's a populist vote, though. That's my point.
Right. But the senators still controlled everything.
I understand,
but to the point where, look what they did to Tiberius.
Yeah.
They beat him to death, and nobody got in trouble.
Nope.
Beat him and 300 people with him to death, threw him in the river.
Yeah, that'd be like Nancy Pelosi walking into, her off going to work one day, and then like all the other senators tearing apart their own furniture and striking her down. It's just absolutely insane.
No, really, what it'd be like, Matt. The analogy would be like, you're right. The senators going into the House, and beating the crap out of Nancy Pelosi and a bunch of the other people in the House, and then killing them, throwing them in the frickin' river, the pond out in front of the Capitol.
Yeah.
Right.
And this was not necessarily. We're not going to say this was accepted. This is a bold move, and even later on, they did when So they did. I believe it was him. They're like, we're going to kill this guy, but we're still going to pass his legislation, right?
Right.
So we're going to remove the source of the problem and placate the masses, which obviously didn't work.
Because the reason
it was just kind of an insane society.
So the reason they did that is to show, okay, we weren't against the people.
Right.
We were against the guy who we think was trying to be a tyrant.
Yeah.
And they did try to slander his name in that direction several times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for all we know, might have been. How do we know? From now, how do we know?
I think Dan quotes Tom Holland when he says, this guy was really trying to do some good stuff for the people.
Mm-hmm.
He actually he does it in reverse order than what I was about to say. What I think what Dan Holland's quotes expresses is that, of course, this guy was trying to produce honor for his family.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Roman, but he was one who really cared about the people.
But we'll never know. That's Tom's.
We'll never know.
And I believe that's totally possible.
Words. He died for his principles.
Or, he died for his ambition. And that's the thing with history is we'll never know.
And Dan leads with the definition of the word ambition. He's like, you have to understand this is at the core of Roman noble society, and it drove their every move. We don't get this nowadays. Here's how it was. He makes it very clear.
But what I want to point out, I think that is a great point, Matt. But what I want to point out is the elites beat to death a person who was trying to go around the system of elites to talk to the masses and say they're ignoring you, they're depriving you of your rights, they're purposely enriching themselves at your detriment, and they beat him to death.
Yeah,
and all the while calling him a tyrant. Okay.
Yeah.
And you see this today, except the beating to death part. But like, what does Trump?
What
does Trump do?
Yeah.
Right. He goes to the working class people and says, nobody's representing. Nobody in Washington gives a shit about you. And I don't know Trump's motivation. Maybe he's honest and he really cares about the working class people, and maybe doesn't. How could I know? Maybe it's all about his honor and trying to be powerful and be present. I don't know. But I've seen a lot of similarities in the way the elites call him a tyrant, and Hitler literally post memes or compare him to Hitler constantly in a very similar way to what the Senate was doing with Tiberius Gracchus. I found that
it's brilliant, dude. I think
really
that's a brilliant comparison.
Basically,
for
exposing inconvenient truths.
Well, maybe.
Well, I mean, wait a minute.
Go ahead.
One thing, if I were to inside trade, I'm going to jail.
Mm-hmm.
But our lawmakers are allowed to.
Right, but you don't even have to get into that specific. Like, okay, all the jobs they send overseas.
The general point about
even if Trump is right or wrong, it doesn't matter. If you tell a group of people that they're being ripped off,
that's what it was.
Some of them are going to believe it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
even if they're not. But I'm not saying he's wrong.
It's the public perception. And
I
think that's a great comparison, George. I'm not going to come down on either. I think the most important thing, besides your general point about what you said, is that we don't know that man's actual motivations. And you weren't talking about Gracchus when you said it. You were talking about a former president of the United States.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to come down on either side of our political debate in the course of this podcast, but I will say that I think that's a great comparison, because no side is immune from radicalizing themselves against a perceived existential threat.
Right.
At a certain point, it doesn't
That's
matter
a great way to say it.
Whether things are good for the people or not, as long as your side, your security, your power is being threatened. And there is an immense amount of relevance to our current domestic politics in America in episode 1 of Death Throes of the Republic.
And it's going to, and I hope not at the episode 5 of Death Throes of the Republic. I hope that ends up not being as relevant to us, because that's where shit goes real sideways. Right? And I'm really hoping we avoid that.
We're doing our part. Let's see if we can get ahead of it. Can I share the notes that I made this while we were deciding to do this addendum?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so very quickly, and this will be truncated because I wasn't expecting an addendum. But so people talk about the downfall of the Roman Empire. There's a whole book written about it. There's tons of books written about it. There's the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. And people say, why did the Roman Empire fall? Well, it's complex and myriadic. You're not going to give one answer. That's just the empire. Dan's talking about the Republic, and the reasons for its decline and fall were just as varied and complex. And in the beginning of this episode, he lays out a very specific and logical and easy to follow series of events that explain it. And I'm not talking about the entire course of the episode. I'm talking about right at the beginning, first 20 minutes. So I kind of jotted these
I made a note about that too. Keep going.
Okay. So I have conquest equals wealth and slaves equals fewer soldiers who were qualified to be a Roman legionary. You had to own land, so there's fewer independent farmers, so there's fewer soldiers. Equals discontent because you can't make money as a citizen, right? And you can't join the army. That profession is denied to you. Equals the tribunes of the plebs who represent the people, who are supposed to, request for land grants for the general people, right? Equals pushback from the patriarchs. Equals conflicts between the conflicts between the patriarchs and the tribunes. Equals greater division of the classes, which led to the entire conflict that's in this first episode.
But the thing that stuck out to me when Dan's doing that at the beginning is it's the very first thing he says is the rapid pace of change.
That's it. That's something I wanted to bring up too. He's like,
Right.
Rome worked very well and was designed to be a small state. You can see it. It's a bunch of families. They're doing great. They're like a gangster family, but they got their little, so they got their relationships with their client and patron. Like they know they're running it. But then they accidentally won a huge world war, and all of a sudden had to rule the world. You know, like we did.
Right.
And he very clearly states this after the Second World War, and look at where we are now. Like all the same stuff is happening.
Dude, it's so crazy. Because if you talk about the pace of change and how fast it was to Rome, it ain't even nothing compared to what we've been dealing with.
Yeah, even over the past 30 years.
Not even close. You have World War I, World War II, the two biggest wars in effing history, the biggest change, nuclear weapons.
Yep. The Cold War.
Rockets, Apollo moon landing, the internet, social media, everything. That's less than 100 years.
Well,
planes.
That's just a bunch of money being dumped into our. Yeah, that's the wealth and opulence that you're seeing.
Well, what's crazy is you think 50 years. Was it about 50 years? 60 years from first flight to landing on the moon.
That's insane, and you'll never see something like that again.
I don't think that's true.
I don't think you'll ever see that kind of that fast of a jump again.
I don't think that's true.
I do, but we'll know. Who knows? There's a lot of technologists that think it's going to stay exponential because it's been exponential.
Well,
but I don't think that's how it works.
Well, going to like computers, right? So they thought, oh, well, there's only 6 generations. We're only going to hit 6 generations of computers. Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, I'm sorry, 8. So it goes in binary, 2, 4, 8. Now it was 16. Then it's 32. Now it's 64. Now it's 128.
Sure.
I mean, and it's exponential because that's how that.
Yeah, we're getting sidetracked. Anyway, I would just say Rogan had Ray Kurzweil on. I'm saying that name wrong, but on his podcast. And that's what he's talking about, how he looks up this chart and he goes from, 1934 to 2023. Okay. And he says it's exponential, and it's been exponential for the last 80 years.
Yeah.
Okay. But that is a tiny sample size.
Sure.
Okay. And that's the problem. Well, you can't look at 80 years and assume that that's going to keep going forever because that's a small sample size. But we need to get back to the actual topic.
One question. One thing I got to throw in there. What if you consider the fact of half-lives? Do you understand what I mean by half-lives?
But you're talking about computer technology. I don't think there's some law that's immutable.
I'm not talking about half. I'm talking like printing press. Maybe took whatever. Let's just say just for fun. Let's say it took 400 years, and then the locomotive 200 years later, and then the automobile 100 years later.
Yeah, but you're cherry picking things. But that's the problem, right? There was shit tons of steps in there, and if you wanted to pick those, then it was this many years.
Well, I'm just talking about mechanization.
But the pace of change, anyway. The point is, the Romans went through a warp speed transition.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But we did that times like 3.
Sure.
Right? All of the money from Britain and Europe, I mean, tons of it transferred here because of World War I and World War II.
Yep.
So that put the foot on the accelerator. Then that led to the huge military-industrial complex. The Cold War led to all kinds of crazy government growth that was completely un-American until then.
Continuing of the military-industrial complex.
Right. And so how much of what's going on in the whole world right now is just a result of the Cold War?
Oh, well, actually, you could say, and Dan Carlin puts this as, where do you stop? Can you say that everything, this is all a result of World War I? Yes. And then you can go back further and say, oh, well, this is a result of, the colonists winning the Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Well, wouldn't it be fun to imagine in America where there was no Cold War? Yeah. Somebody else was in charge of Soviet Union and not Stalin.
Or say Patton got his wish and we just fought the Soviets right after.
That's a different thing. We talked about this lots.
I know we did. I'm just saying.
I don't know what would have happened.
I mean, so very clearly, the illusion of Russia as a competent superpower was an economic driver for America for decades. Okay, so we needed the perception of an enemy to keep, hey, I need money for the military. I need to develop our Air Force. I need to develop nuclear weapons. I know it was a way to funnel money into our defense.
Sure, but that doesn't mean it was an illusion.
Russia was not a competent superpower. They were barely holding
No,
themselves
but
together.
they
over there, just
were
struggling.
They did get nuclear weapons. They did build up that arsenal
because they needed them to compete with us. And
right. But once they
know,
have those, that's the problem, and that's when the Cold War started going
how
sideways.
well do they work? How far can they go? How many of them can they launch? Would they?
But you
would
don't
the
need that
keys
many,
actually been
right?
turned?
But that's when it started going sideways. Was when Russia got the bomb. Right, that's when the Cold War really escalated.
The bomb was a
Before
game
that,
changer all over the place, definitely.
Right.
Yeah. Because
before
any
that,
psycho with a nuclear weapon can destroy a city, and you have to take
right.
that
And then you had
seriously at a
Stalin,
very high level.
And you had Stalin, who was literally probably a psychopath. I shouldn't say literally. He was probably a psychopath.
Probably.
That.
I'll come down on that right now, and you can put that on.
You
a
like
t-shirt.
to go on
Stalin
these
was a
hard takes,
psychopath.
Matt. You like to go out on limbs. Hitler's bad. Stalin was a psychopath.
Fuck Hitler.
Also, I'm saying the true stuff, man. Fuck Hitler and Stalin was a psychopath, and anything else.
Because these are the things that I thought about when I was listening to this episode, though. Is I really did think about what was going on back then and how relevant it is to what's going on now. Now, the nice thing, I think, is our system has things in place that they did not have. And that's, thank God to the Founding Fathers, we have a Supreme Court. That's one check left, right? We have that.
Yeah.
Congress could pull their head out of their asses and start legislating again. They could. They could start being the ones that declared war instead of leaving it up to the president. They could do that.
Well, the president was only meant to be able to declare war for what, 60 or 90 days?
Yeah,
60
like
days?
Immediate issues.
Yeah.
But Congress doesn't ever want to be the one that's like, we started that war. Oops. So they're just like, well, let's put it on the president because he's got to leave after 2 terms.
Yeah.
Those people are going to be there for 40 years.
Well, term limits aren't a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. But at least we have the Supreme Court, and our generals are not our politicians. Those are the 2 big differences between our system and the Roman system.
Could you imagine? No, I'm sorry. Could you imagine like Mad Dog Mattis, like at the front of the line with the rest of the Marines, like just charging into it?
Right.
Like that's.
See, but at some point he probably was that guy.
Oh, he was.
Yeah.
I mean, he worked his way up the ranks, but
Right.
that's not my point. Is like
it's interesting.
Could you imagine? We are used Nancy Pelosi. Could you imagine Nancy Pelosi in like full battle here?
Just I like to make nowadays is that really in the Roman senatorial class, military service, and preferably service with distinction was practically a requirement, but definitely. I mean, okay. So the result of that is that if you were sending troops in the battle, you better know what that looks like, and you better have experienced it firsthand. We are so far separated from that nowadays that we're just tossing dudes around the world and chalking up casualty numbers.
Well, we got Dan Crenshaw.
Right,
I mean, he was there.
Yeah, he's dope. Yeah, I like Dan. Yeah, he's been there. I'm not up on him currently, but I know who you're talking about, and I've followed his career a little bit. Yeah, so
no, you're right.
That is a good
Matt.
thing, and I would like to see more of that. I think that the problem is that when he speaks out about the things that we were just talking about, he is looked down upon by the other people there who feel shamed by his service. You know what I mean? And his honor.
They should. And I hate to say that.
Yeah,
and
I don't even know if he's looked down upon. What I know is the other politicians don't care.
I think the result of
they don't care.
I think the result of the distinction there would be he is having difficulty getting some of his stuff passed and crossed, and he has to go on alternate places to have his voice heard. I mean, it's tough.
But if you look now, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Finish.
I was going to say, do we want all Dan Crenshaws in our representative bodies though?
Right.
Maybe we have a warrior culture. I mean, that's a thing to consider. But I would like to see more of that. And I think if you're sending troops into battle, you better have some blood on your hands, and not the wrong kind. Just to know the sacrifice that the people are making, so that when you make the decisions about whether or not to go to war with a country, you are weighing every possible factor, including the most important one, which is human life.
But this is also something that led to the downfall of the Roman Republic, because their system, the way it worked, is the generals made the most money from those wars.
Yeah.
So they had a financial and political motivation to go to war.
Would you equate that, George? To like senators having the scoop on trade deals where they're making money on the stock market? And
one
there should be
thing, or
legislation
also
against
their
that.
big campaign contributor is Raytheon.
Right. So the money in politics, but very specifically making money from their foreknowledge or service in the Senate directly with their contacts. Legislation should or could be applied there that would help a lot of stuff in our society. Okay.
No. Right, but at least here they try to make it so that it's not so obvious or so blatant. In our system, it's kind of like frowned upon.
Back then, they were like,
in the Romans, it was just that's just what they do.
Like Pompey the Great is a perfect example of that. Motherfucker was rich as hell. He conquered a bunch of shit. He covered the entire Roman budget for a year off his conquest, but he still was, very well off himself.
Yeah, and he took most of the money still. Proud of that when he conquered Asia, he took most of the money, and he still did that.
That was the point of it, yeah. Right. But as Dan points out in this episode, money was not an ends to a means. Or I'm sorry, money was not the end in itself. It was an ends to a means, which was the honor, which was, it's talking about Pompey. He wanted to be respected in the Senate because he wasn't like of the noble class. So that's how they used him to go against Caesar, and we saw how that ended up.
Right.
Well, they all wanted a triumph, right?
Yeah.
Now, one thing I wanted to bring up,
everybody wanted the triumph.
Yeah.
Give me that triumph.
Yeah. But one thing I wanted to bring up is, and it kind of goes back to feeding Raytheon or Boeing or whoever. A lot of the foreign aid we send out, the stipulation is they have to use X amount of those dollars to buy arms from us, from American companies.
Yeah, like Ukraine money and stuff.
Yeah,
yeah,
Israel, Ukraine.
Yeah,
a lot of aid goes that way.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's a big part of it. Now, Matt, you said something that I was also made a note of that I wanted to talk about. And Dan pointed out at the beginning, back then, the money was an ends to the means to get the power. I cannot remember who I heard say this on which podcast, but it was something recently. And he was saying basically, that's basically what it is now. And it is. Money's nothing if you don't have the power for most of the people who want that kind of money. The reason they want the money is to have the power.
Yeah.
Do we have a monarchy class in America? I would say we do, and it's the
we
wealthy.
have an elite class. You mean an aristocracy?
Somewhat above the law. It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Oh, for sure,
if
man.
If your neighborhood is patrolled more by the police than others because of your wealth, if you are exonerated from certain minor or even major crimes because of your wealth, if you have more of an influence in politics and society because of your wealth. That is the fucking same thing as being a duke. I don't care what you say. It's the same thing. You know what I mean? Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well, they came out with that report one year, and I forgot. There's videos about it, and it said, 350 DUIs, X amount of sexual harassment assaults, or sexual harassment claims.
But you'd have to double check those facts. But yeah.
But who do you think this was? And they said, it was Congress.
Right. I would just say that those kind of memes, those could all be BS too. I don't know.
Yeah, but those were going on for a long time.
But that was probably a long time ago, right? And nowadays
it's got better.
Yeah, I mean nowadays people get canceled for stuff.
You have politicians hiding when they're smoking a cigarette.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So nowadays you would know more of that. But my point is the reason people that are rich are rich or want to be rich. It's not so that they're because they're worried about food, right? Like that's not why. Because it's for power, and why do men want power? Evolutionary wise, they want power so they get the best mates, right? Like that's what evolution would tell us anyway. There's a little bit more going on, but that's still part of it too.
I think it speaks to something, deeper than us. Yeah, we were talking about in our book club, we were talking about why men get bored with women, and some people said they're talking about change and man's, like we're connected to. One part of us is, it was actually a group that was talking about spiritual things, but so they're talking about one part of us is connected to the spiritual side, and then we're stuck in time, so we want change, or we sense change, and they're talking about guys just wanting, getting tired with their mates because they want change, and I said I think that's actually conquest. I think it's actually conquest because men are innately wired to want to continue. Yeah. I think that has more to do with winning than it does wanting something, or wanting something new equals winning.
But
I think
why is
very
that
important.
evolutionary wise?
And I think that
Because it gives you a chance to spread your genes more.
The want for power, yeah, and it's very simple, man. I don't think this is controversial at all. Like it's fucking literally like women want to protect their kids, so they're gonna look for the guy who can do that, and the guy who can do that is gonna have the most kids. Get the fuck out of here! It breaks down to that, and I'll fucking stand by that. I'll have a political discussion or a social discussion with you as long as it takes. I don't feel like I'm insulting anyone. I feel like I'm empowering people. And if we got back to our true nature and accepted it, we probably have a better society. We can make developments from that, but we do need to acknowledge our nature and work from there forward.
But you also remember the reason that we have a culture where that's frowned upon is because of the Western culture that got us to this point where we have human rights and we have all these great things like the Constitution, and that all stems from putting cultural carrots and sticks to curb those natural behaviors. Okay? Because man's natural behavior is not necessarily to be civilized, right?
It's not.
But civilization allows us to have all these great things, so we need to curb them, and the best way to do that is with a culture that puts carrots and sticks for that. So we look down upon a man who has multiple wives. Okay, we think about that here in the West as being ridiculous or being wrong, right? And there's a reason for that, and that's because for society to flourish, it is better if men stay with their women in general. Okay? And that is allowed for a more peaceful society, because if they're out there conquering, trying to get more wives, then they're more likely to go to war, or they're more likely to fight with their neighbor or the next clan over. Because, well, I have these 2 wives, but I like his 2, so I should beat him up. I should take his. So by all of these cultural traditions that led us to this point are the reason why we are so living in such a good time to be alive, especially for women. It's never been a better time to be a woman in the history of the world. That's just an undebatable fact.
What were you going to say, Matt?
In America.
Yes.
Thank you. Wait.
In the West.
In Western.
In the West. But you're right.
Let's not get in our America bubble here, yeah.
Yeah, in the West.
Can I just follow up on that really quick?
Sure.
So I think that the pushback from, reverting to our primal nature, which does, it meant women protect their children, and so they look for a powerful man, and that man seek power to, have more children because they'll receive, the primary mate that we just discussed. I think that the pushback from that is that, and this speaks to what you're saying, George, is that a lot of that comes from the Western societies that developed our philosophy, like the Greeks, and their endeavor was to remove man from his animal nature, okay, or remove, humanity from our animal natures. I'm just going to say people. So we are attempting to evolve nowadays, and we are in fits and starts, but we are. And so they're like, women don't need a fucking man anymore to have a kid, and they don't need the shelter that a man provides and the meat that a man provides to keep that child safe and fed. They don't. And so that dynamic has changed. Men don't need, the same things from women anymore. So we're figuring out this strange new world, but I just really appreciate it if we could have a better conversation about it.
Right. Like, just because something is old doesn't mean it's bad. Just because something something stems from a time where there was also bad things like slavery and misogyny, it doesn't mean we need to throw it out.
I can't believe you literally, I've been telling you for 20 years.
No, but I never disagreed with you with that. I'm disagreeing with you with balancing your effing checkbook.
Yeah,
all right, Grandpa, don't start. Like, again, there's nuance here. Just because something's old doesn't mean it's bad, but just because something old doesn't mean it's good. Okay? There's nuance. You don't got a rotary phone. Right? Like, there's...
Matt, I've been telling George, when all right, so when all this Bluetooth stuff...
we don't
need all this crap. It's just crap.
No, it wasn't the Bluetooth. It was the Alexa.
Yeah. Anyway,
And I'm in the long run, I was probably wrong on that because I did bring a spy into my house. Okay, so you were probably right, Grandpa.
Hey,
but I stand by the checkbook.
No, it's okay to write checks.
No, it's fine, but you don't need to balance it.
Yeah, you should balance it.
Why?
So then you know.
Anyway, Grandpa, you could just check your app. Anyway, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you said though is something that I really think is important to talk about, and you said, we're figuring out how to live in this new world, and a woman doesn't need a man to have a baby and things like that, and how that's good progress. And I'm not sure that that's progress, right? Because while the woman doesn't need to be a sorry, go ahead.
I'm not saying it's good progress. It's just where we're going, and it seems to be what people want. So we'd be able to figure out a way to not clash with each other so violently, according to these issues.
Right.
I would say that I would say that family is important, man.
Right, because that's what I was going to say. Because we don't know.
I honestly don't know what it looks like to be raised by my parents split up when I was 12. Like, it affected me, you know what I mean,
Sure.
in ways. But I still had a dad figure when I was a kid. I learned a lot from him. He was a handy guy. He built stuff. He knew how to fix a car, like all that kind of stuff. My mom was a nurturer. She nurtures people today in a hospital. Like, they were those archetypes.
Right.
So I know what that's like to have those archetypes, and I know what it's like to have that split in your life and have that be removed and the consequences of that in your development and your perception of those archetypes. But I don't know what it's like to be in whatever this new world is. I'm just going to throw an example. A single mother or two women raising a child on their own with no father figure, two men raising a child on their
kid.
I'm not saying it's bad.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would say
I agree, but I just don't default to it being good. I don't know.
I really need to cement the foundation of my intention here is that I would think that the values learned from each person in my life, according to those archetypes, is what is important. And if you're able to receive those from either of those family dynamics, not for me to decide, but I see no problem with that as long as we continue to produce healthy, socially conscious, moral children who represent the values of the society that made our country great.
Right.
And that's a whole other conversation going forward because our country is changing. But I think that family doesn't necessarily need to have one definition. I'm willing to break new ground with it. Absolutely.
Sure.
So let's not cement everything in the past, but let's at the very least acknowledge why we act the way we do. It's still good in certain ways. And where we are separating or diverging or finding new ground, conversation is the best tool to resolving differences, to finding middle ground, and to providing a path forward that allows us to move forward as a society rather than as groups of factions who hate and despise and publicly talk shit about each other.
That is useless. It's worse than useless. It is divisive, and it is polarizing, and it is the kind of shit that leads to civil war.
Shaming the other side for their nature is not going to get us anywhere productive.
Right, but assuming that your actions have no consequences on the next generation also is dangerous. Like, one of the things I saw a poll about surrogacy, and it was Will Riley put this up on his Twitter. He's like, just, are you anti or are you pro or against surrogacy? And I don't know, because I don't think we have any clue what that does to a kid. And I don't care.
The data is
we don't know. We're experimenting with all of this on the fly. We are just winging it and assuming that humans are adaptable enough to survive. And maybe they are. I just don't know. But I don't think we should just assume that they're going to be okay.
I think it depends about what we're taught. At a certain point, it is about who it's taught by. You know what I mean?
But there's a lot of bonds between a baby and its mother in the womb.
Sure.
All your epigenetics. So even if the DNA is both your parents, there's a lot of stuff coming from the birth mom there. And you're ripping them away from that. And I don't know if that's going to make a... By
surrogacy, I'm sorry. Let's just be clear. You mean having your child be born in the body of another person? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a big fucking deal, man.
And I don't know that. What if those kids are way more likely to be sociopaths?
Yeah, but let me ask you a question.
I don't know about that, but
it might be though. That's all I'm saying is it's possible.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question.
I know for a fact, and I'll stand my ground on this, that we are burgeoning into new ground sociologically. But biologically, we are 99% rooted in the animal kingdom, okay? Straight up. And a lot of our behavior is dictated by biology. We need to be very careful about how we proceed, because we will produce sociopaths if we violently separate those worlds.
That's what I think.
No.
I think it's possible.
On the fact of surrogacy, all right? So what is the difference? I mean, you're right, epigenetics and all. Let's just skip past that. I just want to, if you have a surrogate, and then, so let's say the baby makes a bond, like it knows your voice, like when you're talking, it can hear you, hear the mom talking.
Yeah, he or she.
Yeah. So anyway, so you take that baby away from, the surrogate and give it to the natural, the DNA, the mother who's actually DNA or egg was used.
Right.
What does that do to the baby, first of all? But how is that any different? It's a little different than what about what the English used to do when they would send their kids away to the, to wet nurses or.
Sure. That's the first thing I thought about, Scott. Yeah, there's
and I think you would see that they raised generations of kids that were not good family bonds and had a lot of parental issues. Sure, but at least they knew their mom.
Not until later, though.
Oh, they knew them. They just didn't nurse at them. The wet nurse didn't raise the kid by herself.
And
sometimes
Dan Carlin even said that they would send their kid away at a young age to like some farm, like
boarding schools and stuff. But that is not a young age.
That's not what he was saying. He's saying like babies.
Oh, you're talking about like in the Depression and shit?
No, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about, right, Matt?
Yeah. Like consider Victorian England, where some rich lady has a kid, she doesn't want to nurse it, so she has a wet nurse.
Yeah, but that's a different thing because the wet nurse lived in their house.
No, they were also sending kids away to like some place in the country.
There was people in the street who would nurse your baby for you. Like it was
but that's not.
I'm telling you.
I think you're confusing two different things.
I'll find
that was something like the Russians did a lot.
I think
the communists did a lot.
I think the joining of what you're trying to say here is the purpose of having a child back then, where we're like, did you want that connection with it because you are my child, or did you want a worker for my farm or someone to take over my business? And that was our relationship as parent and child.
It was probably both.
But the exact phrase that Dan said, like, and he even brought like this Victorian woman saying up, I find myself being more attached to my daughter now that she can pick me out of she can find me out of a group of people. Do you remember that?
No, I don't think that's from a Dan Carlin episode.
That's 100% from
unless it's like Suffer the Children.
I think it was.
Because I think I only listened to that one once. So it could be that one and I wouldn't be able to know.
So
because that one was depressing. But Matt, one thing you said there that I think is interesting too, though, is just because they needed more people around on the farm and stuff doesn't mean they didn't bond with that kid, right? Like they probably felt a lot of the same things we feel when we look at our kids.
Sure.
But they were harder maybe
people. Maybe the farm versus the business dynamic was a different relationship. Yeah,
right. But I mean,
because it's just more hands-on and
but they
interactive. Yeah,
they're still humans, and that love that we feel for our kids is in our DNA.
Do you recall
that's hardwired into the system?
Do you recall the old school toughness episode where Dan talks about when you signed a contract, a business contract, to be specific, you would have your child beaten so they would remember it as a witness?
No, I don't remember that.
That's very much something. No, that's something
crazy.
That stood out to me, man.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the times in ancient history that Dan talks about all the time where they're taking hostages, right? Somebody's kids to ensure that the king or that other person giving up hostages. Yeah, right. Like exactly. Yeah. It was a common practice. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that only works because you love your kid, right? Because you care. Otherwise, you just go knock up another person and make another kid, right? Like if you're the king, right? It works because you have a bond with that child, right? That was there even then. it's just interesting, and we're way off topic, so we should probably get back to the
No,
topic.
this is what the addendum is. No, this is what
It
the
is,
addendum is
and
about.
I love these conversations because this is the fun part of why we started talking hardcore in the first place.
I was thinking about that while we were talking about it. I was like, so far afield, but the outer edges of Dan's themes are what you do, and just generally, that's what this show is about. I find a lot of different interesting ways to express my views and philosophies and have fun during these conversations. And then I think in this one specifically, like we've really nailed some important stuff about our contemporary American society
and stuff that's important to talk about, like you said.
I think it shows the wealth of Dan's he's so comprehensive. Okay, here. People ask me what your show is about, and here's the way I describe it. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Dan's episodes are the tip of the iceberg. The Talking Hardcore guys cut that iceberg up into chunks, build an igloo out of it, sit down inside of that, and have a conversation.
Dude, that's awesome. That's a t-shirt. Matt, we're making that into a t-shirt. We're going to be sitting in an igloo talking about history, smoking a pipe. Something like that. Like that's awesome. No, I appreciate that. That's it. Because that's really how we like to think about it. Like, this is how it started. We were talking about episodes of history, hardcore history. And that always led us to these great conversations in all these different fields. It's not like we're only talking about history at all. And we're talking about technology, and we're talking about biology, and we're talking about all these other things. But they spark from something we learned or thought about because of hardcore history. And that's what we wanted to share with people, and we want to encourage other people to do the same. So listen to those old episodes, listen to the new episodes, and join our conversation. Come to the Discord channel. You can talk about this stuff there. Like, we love it.
2nd century BC Rome to epigenetics and surrogacy.
Right. I think, but then I've been, since we did Tom Holland's packs for the book club, I've been thinking about that so much. Some of those emperors, like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you see the stuff that happens now, and you're like, I guess that's been happening forever.
Sure.
Like, it's such a lesson to learn in the value of his work, of Dan's work. I mean, it remains. This is even an older episode. Like, this is not a hardcore history addendum episode. This is not a common sense episode.
When was this, like 2008 or 2010, something like that?
It's not something that he released contemporaneously as commentary on our current American politics. It's something very old, very eternal, and very important. And re-listening to this for this trippy episode, and thank goodness for the addendum where we got into the meat and potatoes of it, just spoke to me with all the stuff that's going on today, and just makes me appreciate his work even more. Cheers, Dan.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, it really helps. Without hardcore history, the way I think about everything that goes on in the world would be much shallower.
For sure.
I have such a much better depth of thought to it because of that.
Now, do you think, guys, since we are talking about the acceleration of technology, do you think people that have more information from worldwide information are happier or more unhappy because of all that information?
I'm going to relate that question in terms of democracy, which we were discussing before the episode, where it comes down to an informed public. And I would say that information is good for society in that regard, but it can be manipulated to great extreme in the negative light as far as politics are involved, which is speaking to the bottleneck and probably conscientious one, Scott, that you were talking about when people mention populist democracy as far as the electoral college. But people receiving more information. What do we want? We want echo chambers that validate our own opinions. Okay, that's really what we will default to so many times. Okay, we will default to what makes us happy, seem right, make us horny, make us feel good, whatever. And there are many other. There's two ways to do that. There's other voices, crowds we will find, and then we'll find these little factions that make us happy but are terrible for society, possibly. And then there's the people looking at this going, this group of people, I can say this, and I can get them to vote this way.
Well, let me. The funny thing you mentioned that is for some reason the algorithms always it targets what I interact with. So first of all,
Sure.
the things that pop up on any feed of any social media that I have
Boobs.
isn't things that I like.
You got a lot of boobs. Let's not pretend like you're not getting a lot of bikinis.
Most of the time,
You know you are.
But no, it's like how I found that nothing is going to get better communist page.
Yeah.
I mean, it found something that would
slow down for a half a second, and they're like, oh, he likes that, so they feed you more.
Yeah, but it's counterintuitive because I don't like it, but I can't help myself but from arguing or at least having a discussion with people that counter points of views.
As that information becomes more widespread and everybody learns these things, we build up defenses to it. So it's very interesting that you guys brought this up about technology, though.
One thing.
Sure.
So, yeah, you're right. A lot of people do like echo chambers, Matt, but for some reason, I always venture outside of it.
So
good. That's why we're here. That's why I continue to enjoy
because you're a troll.
Your very generous invitations to your podcast is that we meet in the middle on a lot of things, and I present ideas from a different point of view, both from my own beliefs and from other communities with which I interact as sort of theoreticals, and you guys bring things from the other side. I would not be happy with these conversations were they only an agreement with my own beliefs.
Right. I mean, Scott and I don't agree on everything either.
No.
But
the challenge.
Right.
It's the challenge that interests me. It's what keeps me involved. Perhaps our viewers as well, our listeners as well, and it's how we learn. It's how we get our ideas.
For sure. But so you were asking about technology and is it overall like the internet, right?
Yep.
And information. Is it an overall positive or negative? It's a positive. Mm-hmm. And only a pessimist is going to say it's a negative. Because look at this, right? Let me explain why I think that, and I will say it. If you asked people 100 years after the printing press, was its overall influence positive or negative? The people in charge probably would have said negative.
Sure.
Right. The Protestant Reformation, a lot of stuff.
It challenged.
Because it gave the people access to the words of God, right? And that was enough to change everything.
It's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah.
Right. But
it challenged the authority of the priests at the time. Yeah.
Right. But
which was
the internet now, right? The access to information. It's a double-edged sword for sure. Every technology is, right? They're all double-edged swords. Mm-hmm. So we have to be careful not to slit our wrists.
Sure.
Because it's easy to get fooled. It's easy to get duped. And people are still building up that tough skin, learning to dodge those things. And that's going to take time if we survive it. But one of the biggest benefits that we don't even think about now, or we take for granted, that wasn't even around 30 years ago, is that you don't need a person to teach you something in so many situations now. You don't need a college. You don't need so many. Knowledge had all these gatekeepers.
Sure.
That all had incentives to keep the knowledge to themselves.
Of course.
Right?
Because how do you...
But now the incentive structure is switched. So now the incentive is to give the knowledge away. Because then advertisers will pay you, or you'll get eyeballs, and that builds you all kinds of following and all that stuff, right? So now you can learn anything in the world if you want to with a fucking smartphone.
You can, but the problem is, and here's the other thing that I wanted to bring up, especially when we're talking about technology, or we want to go to let's say like the new legislation against TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of younger people, aren't using that device for information. They're using it strictly for entertainment.
Yeah, that's information.
It's not.
Yeah. I learned so many things from things that entertain me. Hardcore history is entertainment.
Yeah, but not,
No, not yet. It is.
It's not in the same way. How to do it?
Listen, you can find valuable information from the dumbest shit. Trust
I
me.
laughed out loud several times during the listening of this episode, and it wasn't even the jokes. It was just like, oh, that's a funny little political thing, you know?
Right.
Totally.
But I mean, like, so I watch dumb fishing YouTube videos, right?
Yeah. So you know how to make a lure.
But not just those ones. I watch ones where guys go to a store, buy a stupid lure, and then go out and try it, right? But I still learn a lot about fishing, even though they're not doing this to teach you how to fish. They're just making fishing content for people who like to watch fishing content. But by watching that, I'm still learning stuff because I'm paying it. That's how our brains work. Now, so you look at these TikTok dances and you think there's nothing valuable out of that. And maybe there's not, but maybe there is. I don't know, but there might be. In fact, there probably is something of value coming out of some of that. I don't assume it's all bad just because it's the younger generation and they're all corrupted.
I didn't say.
I know, but maybe they are. But they are learning a thicker skin than we'll ever have. They're never going to believe any videos. Well, not never, but they're going to learn to not believe anything because it's all going to be deep-faked. In our generation, and worse, our parents' generation, are going to keep falling for those deepfakes for a long time before we build up the natural immunity that these kids. Like I showed my nephew this picture on Instagram. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's all filtered." And I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "That's a fake butt." I'm like, "You sure?" He's like, "Oh yeah." He was like 13. He could just tell, right? Because he's growing up with that.
Yeah.
Where they know that you don't believe that stuff, so they have a thicker skin.
But that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is you're right. There's a wealth of knowledge that you don't even have to look up anymore. You don't have to go buy a book. You don't have to read the book. You can literally watch somebody do it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not. That's information that's not being utilized.
But it is. Okay, so I was talking to this guy today at work. Okay, and a good friend of his is a mechanic.
How old is he?
I think he's 25, 30.
Okay.
He's a mechanic. He started by learning a little bit from his buddy's dad, okay? Yep. And then he just started fixing people's cars and looking up on YouTube because he didn't know. So he didn't have to go work at a garage for 5 years to learn. He just started teaching himself after he found a love of it. And there's so many things like that.
Yeah. Or you could do a 1 year, 6 months to 1 year trade school on how to be a mechanic, and they teach you literally.
Sure, but that takes money.
Sure.
They already have the internet. They're already paying for that.
That's fair.
So he's already making money from this job because he learned how to do it watching stuff on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, and it's not just mechanics, it's all kinds of things. And it's not just YouTube and it's not just videos. Books, websites, all that stuff. There's so much information available. There's master classes. There's all those things. There's so many ways to have access, even if you have to pay. It's a lot cheaper than Harvard. It's a lot cheaper than a regular 4-year degree now. That's too expensive. And the universities have to realize that model is broken. People don't need them that much anymore. So if they want to keep in business, they got to lower their prices because information's free in so many places, or at least way cheaper than what they're giving it away for or what they're selling for. The internet is breaking that stranglehold, and what you're doing then is you're supercharging the brains of way more people than ever got supercharged before, right? How many people used to have all the knowledge available to come up with great ideas? A lot less.
Sure.
And as the more this spreads, the more that we'll have access to it. Now, there's also the more that we'll have access to the negative things of that.
Sure.
So if we can survive that, then it's going to be sweet.
But that's the point I'm bringing up.
Yeah.
I mean,
I agree.
And really, the whole TikTok thing. Let me be completely honest here. It's more about spying and and access to all the devices in your house and your router and all kinds of other stuff that
sure. I don't know how I feel about the TikTok ban. I don't know. It's tricky.
I think I can kind of break this down into 2 points. I'm sorry, George. Did you want to finish up there? It sounded like you're okay.
No, I'm good.
So, one technology is as useful as the people who are using it, right? And the use, the intention, is going to be determined by their society. Okay, the intention of their society. So, what if the Romans had the internet? What would they have been doing with it? Figuring it out how to increase their family's honor or whatever was important to them. What is important to us as a society has been determined not only by the progression of values and evolution that we talked about since then in the modern age, but also by the people who are providing us these tools. Okay, so what if Martin Luther, who propagated that Bible that was written in plain English or plain German that anybody could understand, which was such a threat to the established power of the day, which was the Catholic Church or the priesthood. What if he was Mark Zuckerberg? Okay, what his intentions were for the proliferation of that technology, that information, had a certain end goal to use the end user to make money, to sell products, to direct society towards political means, when really, I believe truly, and this was a contrast to his politics of the time, so there was a political end to it, just to fucking get people the information they need to make their own goddamn minds up. You know what I mean?
But I got a buddy who's Catholic that still will tell you that Martin Luther was a wacko.
Okay, sure, but
it's just funny because that's 400 years later.
I don't know enough about the guy.
I don't either.
Describe his yeah, me neither. But that's what was the effect was.
How did it end?
And I think it's comparable because people are going to use technology for what they consider it to be useful for. And I'm writing a fucking book on my phone every day at work. I'll tell you that right now.
You probably shouldn't. Hopefully your bosses don't listen to this.
I don't really have bosses, but no.
Okay.
I have bosses, but they're like 2 hours drive away from me, checking in by text message and shit. So
you're writing your book.
I'm lucky, but I am using my phone to be productive in my creative endeavors, which are the most important thing in the world to me, and I am grateful for that tool.
And the internet makes it easier for you to do that.
Other people are playing fucking Candy Crush, which is not play Candy Crush. That's fine. It's great. Yep. Use it for entertainment. If you're being milked for money, that's a thing. And if you're being
if that's how they choose to spend their entertainment dollars, that's how they choose. If you're being
suddenly diverted toward a path of politics by the people who are implementing that technology, that's a whole other thing altogether. So, I mean, that's kind of my summation of like the usefulness of technology.
That's where it gets scary.
I think conscientiousness is where it comes to, and it speaks to the intention of our society, which is, what the fuck is it? Like, Dan summed up the intention of Roman society in about 10 words in the first 5 minutes of that episode.
Right.
Sum up American society with the same concise.
What it used to mean
definition.
Was individual liberty.
I think it would be much more difficult nowadays.
It didn't used to be.
In itself is a problem, and there's a conversation to be had around there. It didn't
think
used to be either. You're right. It didn't used.
I think if you probably asked the founding fathers to sum it up in a sentence, they probably would have said,
"Surely, yeah."
Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness.
Fucking straight up.
It should have been life, liberty, and property.
Yeah, that's what Locke said. They changed it to the pursuit of happiness, which I think is probably a little better. Because
Scott, the possession of property is actually tying into the bourgeois class and is very much anti-egalitarian.
He's joking.
So I'd appreciate if you. There's this little book that I have. It's called the Communist Manifesto. I'd like to.
Yeah, why don't you send Scott?
There's actually a very.
Can you send us some
YouTube
cliff
video
notes
that breaks it all down? Like if I could just send you this link.
Here, watch this TikTok.
Stop it. Yeah, there you go.
We're gonna get you there, buddy.
Life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness.
The reason the pursuit of happiness works is because.
What is the pursuit of happiness? Did you ever achieve happiness?
That's not the point, right? You can pursue it.
That means something very happiness means something very specific to the individual, which can be generalized by a society, which speaks to the intention of that society, which is largely determined by the state, which needs to be fucking held in check.
But what I think what they mean by that is the freedom to pursue without being locked into a class structure, a caste system, right? Because you have to remember that those things were very real in most of the world and still are in a lot of places, right? Like pursuit of happiness means if you want to go out and take a risk to be an artist, you can do it.
Sure.
You might starve. But there's no rule saying you can't make art. If you want to try to start a business, go for it. Right? That's the American thing. Like, that's a real thing.
I think by looking at the opposite of what was provided by those three words, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, or three concepts, we can see what they meant by them or were providing. In the pursuit of happiness, like, what was the opposite of happiness where they were coming from? It was being under the yoke of a noble class, right? And you know, with all the caste system that you spoke of, being a part of that. And so we must understand the world just prior to the definition of those concepts as they apply to our current society.
Right. That's why the Declaration of Independence is so important.
That's the most important document we have.
Well,
and then the Bill of Rights.
The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
I don't know, man. I updated my my Facebook legal terms. And
man, you're on fire.
There were some pretty.
Would you take an edible? You're just on fire.
No, Matt took an Adderall. He's on PEDs.
He's on PEDs. He wanted to win a trivia, so he took performance-enhancing drugs.
He's got a bunch of notes. He already knew all the answers. You cheater.
Yeah, he may have paid me. I'm just saying, he may have paid me. All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you made it to this far, I'm impressed. Please go to the comments and what should we have them comment if they made it? And if you made it this far, go to the YouTube channel and type in the comments. We need something.
I'm not a troll.
Yeah, type in Scott is a troll.
No.
Yeah,
not
type in Scott's a troll.
Not a troll.
But you are a troll.
But I'm not a troll.
But you're clearly a troll.
See, George doesn't know how to use the definition. That's not. I'm not the definition of a troll.
That's exactly what trolls say.
If you opened up Webster's
that's
and
exactly
they had a troll in
say.
there, so I would be that. That'd be my.
I mean, you even kind of look like one.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it. So if you made it this far, go to the YouTube channel and type in Scott's a troll in the comments so that we know if anybody actually made it. Please do that because I really want to know if anybody made it to the end of this.
I don't think anybody.
Yeah.
I don't know. Thank you all. Probably not. All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for joining us. That was a lot of fun.
Peace out.